Lieutenant Sarah Chen stared at the green stripe on her uniform sleeve, the color that marked her as unproven in the Galactic Defense Corps. Around her, battle-hardened veterans wore blue and gold stripes, their colors earned through blood and victory across a dozen star systems. The green stripe felt like a brand of shame, especially here on Forward Base Kepler, where every soldier had seen real combat except her. The briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as Commander Vex Tai, a towering Kralian with chitinous armor and 4 arms, addressed the mixed species assembly. His mandibles clicked with each word, translated through neural implants that every Corps member received. "Intelligence reports confirm it," Vex Tai announced, his reptilian eyes scanning the room. "The Devourers have broken through our outer defenses at the Proxima Gate. 3 colony worlds have already gone dark. We estimate 48 hours before their advance fleet reaches this sector." Sarah's stomach dropped. The Devourers were the nightmare that every sentient species feared. A hive-minded race of biomechanical horrors that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but barren rock in their wake. They had appeared from the galactic rim 5 years ago, and every battle against them had been a desperate struggle for survival. Sergeant Kozlov, a gruff human veteran with scars covering half his face, leaned over to whisper to his squad. "Never thought I'd see the day. 40 years in this uniform, and now we're facing the end of everything." Sarah caught fragments of similar conversations throughout the room. The hegemony forces had never won a major engagement against the Devourers. At best, they managed tactical retreats that saved some civilian populations. At worst, entire fleets disappeared without sending so much as a distress signal. "Our mission is simple," Vex Tai continued. "Hold this position at all costs. The civilian evacuation of New Geneva requires 72 hours to complete. We buy them that time, no matter the price." A Zephyrian pilot, her crystalline skin refracting the room's light into rainbow patterns, raised one of her 6 arms. "Commander, what about reinforcements? The 3rd Fleet was supposed to be in this sector." Vex Tai's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was the Kralian equivalent of a bitter laugh. "The 3rd Fleet encountered the Devourer Vanguard 6 hours ago. We lost contact 40 minutes into the engagement." Silence fell over the room like a funeral shroud. The 3rd Fleet had been 20,000 ships strong, including 3 battle carriers and the pride of the hegemony navy. If they were gone, Forward Base Kepler's modest garrison of 800 troops and 12 ships stood no chance. "I won't lie to you," Vex Tai said, his 4 arms spread wide. "This is likely our final stand. But remember why we fight. Behind us are 2 billion civilians who have never known the horror of devourer consumption, mothers holding children who still believe in tomorrow, scientists on the verge of breakthroughs that could change the galaxy, artists whose masterpieces will never exist if we fail here." Sarah touched the small photograph tucked into her breast pocket. Her younger brother Marcus, grinning at his graduation from the Academy of Engineering. He was somewhere in the evacuation fleet, probably working around the clock to repair damaged civilian ships. If she failed here, if the Devourers broke through, he would die screaming as the biomechanical parasites burrowed into his brain. The briefing continued with tactical assignments. Sarah found herself assigned to Defense Grid 7, considered one of the least important positions. It was a collection of automated plasma cannons and shield generators on the station's underside, far from the main battle zones where the real fighting would happen. Another reminder that Command saw her as inexperienced, suitable only for babysitting equipment, while veterans died gloriously on the front lines. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah noticed the looks. Some pitying, others openly dismissive. She heard Sergeant Kozlov mutter to another human soldier, "Can't believe they're wasting a position on Green Stripe. Should have sent her to the civilian fleet where she belongs." The words stung because part of her agreed. Sarah had joined the Corps straight from university, her engineering degree earning her an officer's commission but no respect from the enlisted ranks. Her first assignment had been to a peaceful research station, where the most dangerous threat was equipment malfunctions. Then came a brief stint at a diplomatic outpost, where her biggest challenge was managing supply logistics. Now, facing the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known, she felt woefully unprepared. Her quarters were sparse, containing only a narrow bunk, a small desk, and a holographic display showing the current tactical situation. Red dots representing devourer forces crept steadily across the star map like a spreading infection. Each dot represented hundreds of ships, millions of the biomechanical horrors that had already consumed 17 inhabited worlds. Sarah pulled up her personal files, scrolling through engineering schematics and theoretical papers she had written at the academy. Her thesis had been on adaptive defense systems, proposing networks of automated defenses that could evolve their tactics in real time. The academy professors had praised it as innovative thinking, but no one in the military had shown interest in implementing such untested theories. A soft chime announced an incoming message. Sarah's heart lifted momentarily, hoping it might be from Marcus, but the sender was listed as official military communication. She opened it with growing dread. Lieutenant Chen. The message began. Due to equipment failures in Grid 7's central computer core, you are hereby assigned to manual operation of all defensive systems in your sector. Engineering estimates repair completion at 96 hours minimum. You are authorized to requisition one technical assistant if available. Sarah stared at the message in disbelief. They were sending her to operate an entire defense grid manually, during the most important battle in galactic history, with maybe one helper if she was lucky. It was either supreme confidence in her abilities, or a polite way of sending her somewhere she couldn't interfere with real military operations. She made her way through the station's corridors toward Defense Grid 7, passing groups of soldiers preparing for battle. Veterans checked weapons and armor with practiced efficiency. The newer recruits, identifiable by their nervous energy and clean equipment, tried to emulate the calm professionalism of their experienced comrades. In the armory, Sarah requisitioned a standard sidearm and light combat armor. The quartermaster, an elderly Vorthok whose tentacles moved with surprising grace despite his obvious age, looked at her green stripe and shook his head sadly. "First battle, young one?" he asked, his translated voice carrying notes of grandfatherly concern. "Yes, sir." "Advice from someone who has seen too many wars?" he said, selecting a modified plasma rifle from a special rack. "Survival matters more than glory. Better to live as a coward than die as a hero. Take this instead of the standard issue. It has a higher power cell and better cooling system." Sarah accepted the weapon gratefully, noting its superior craftsmanship. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," the Vorthak replied. "Just try to live long enough to make the thanks worthwhile." Defense Grid 7 was located in the station's lower sections, accessible through a series of maintenance tunnels that few people ever used. The grid itself was an impressive sight. 12 massive plasma cannons arranged in a geometric pattern around a central command bunker, each weapon capable of punching through a battleship's armor at maximum range. Shield generators hummed with barely contained energy, their blue glow casting strange shadows on the metal walls. The command bunker was cramped, filled with monitoring screens and control interfaces designed for a full crew of 6 specialists. Now, with the computer core offline, everything would have to be operated manually. Sarah began familiarizing herself with the systems, noting that whoever had designed this grid had been thinking along similar lines to her academy thesis. The weapons could be networked to create overlapping fields of fire, and the shield generators could be reconfigured to create protective barriers for the cannons themselves. "You must be Lieutenant Chen." Sarah turned to see a young man in engineer's coveralls approaching through the tunnel. He was human, probably in his early 20s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested this was his first combat assignment as well. "I'm Technician Rodriguez," he continued, offering a slight smile. "Command sent me to assist with grid operations. I have to admit, I was hoping for a posting somewhere with better company." "Better company?" Rodriguez gestured at the empty bunker around them. "No offense, ma'am, but Defense Grid 7 isn't exactly where they send their top performers. The smart money says we'll be watching the battle from here, while the real action happens up top." Sarah found herself oddly grateful for his honesty. "Well, Rodriguez, let's make sure we're ready just in case the smart money is wrong." They spent the next several hours running diagnostics and familiarizing themselves with the manual controls. The plasma cannons were older models but well maintained, each capable of sustained fire for approximately 40 minutes before requiring cooldown cycles. The shield generators were more modern, featuring adaptive frequency modulators that could adjust their defensive characteristics based on incoming fire. As they worked, Sarah began to see possibilities. The grid's layout followed standard hegemony doctrine, designed for maximum firepower concentration against approaching enemies. But the Devourers didn't fight like conventional fleets. They swarmed, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, while their smaller craft attempted to infiltrate defensive perimeters. "Rodriguez," she said, studying the tactical displays, "what would happen if we reconfigured the cannon targeting systems for independent operation instead of coordinated fire?" The technician looked up from a shield generator control panel, his expression thoughtful. "Well, it would reduce our concentrated firepower against large targets, but it would let us engage multiple smaller threats simultaneously. Not exactly standard doctrine, though. Standard doctrine hasn't been working very well against the Devourers." Rodriguez grinned. "You know what, Lieutenant? I think I'm going to like this assignment after all." They worked through the night, modifying targeting algorithms and reconfiguring shield patterns. Sarah found herself drawing on every theoretical paper she had written, every simulation she had run at the academy. For the first time since joining the Corps, she felt like her unconventional ideas might actually matter. Dawn brought the first wave of evacuating civilian ships, their engines leaving bright streaks across the starfield as they fled toward the inner systems. Sarah watched them through the grid's external cameras, thinking of Marcus and the billions of other people whose lives depended on buying those crucial 72 hours. The Devourers arrived 6 hours ahead of schedule. The first sign was a shimmering distortion in space near the Proxima Gate, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Then, the distortion tore open, revealing the nightmare beyond. Devourer ships poured through the dimensional rift like insects from a disturbed hive, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with unnatural life. They moved in perfect coordination despite their chaotic appearance. Thousands of vessels ranging from fighter-sized parasites to massive mobile bases that defied conventional understanding of starship design. "All stations, this is command," Vextai's voice crackled through the communication system. "Enemy contact confirmed. All units to battle stations. Remember, we hold for 72 hours. Sarah strapped herself into the grid command chair, her hands moving across control interfaces with growing confidence. Around her, monitoring screens showed the approaching enemy force in terrifying detail. The Devourers weren't just attacking. They were spreading like a living disease, surrounding the station from every conceivable angle. "Rodriguez, bring all systems to full power," she ordered, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "And activate the modifications we made to the targeting systems." "Aye, ma'am. All cannons charging, shields at maximum capacity. Our non-standard configuration is active and ready." The space around Forward Base Kepler erupted into chaos as the battle began. The station's main weapons opened fire, their brilliant beams cutting through the void to strike the largest Devourer vessels. Point defense systems activated automatically, filling space with deadly crossfire designed to intercept incoming missiles and fighters. But the Devourers had learned from previous engagements. Instead of the frontal assault that standard doctrine anticipated, they scattered into smaller groups that attacked from seemingly random directions. Many of the station's weapons, configured for concentrated fire against large targets, found themselves unable to track the swiftly moving swarms. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing understanding. The enemy wasn't trying to destroy the station quickly. They were probing, testing defenses, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. It was exactly the kind of adaptive strategy her thesis had warned about. "Contact!" Rodriguez shouted. Multiple small craft approaching Grid 7. They're coming in low and fast, using the station's own superstructure as cover. Sarah's hands flew across the control interfaces, bringing the plasma cannons online with their new independent targeting protocols. Instead of waiting for coordinated fire solutions, each weapon began engaging targets as soon as they entered range. The modified shields created overlapping barriers that protected the cannons from return fire while allowing clear firing lanes. The first wave of devourer parasites struck Grid 7 like a living storm. They were unlike anything in the Course tactical databases. Writhing masses of biomechanical tissue wrapped around high-energy weapon cores, moving with impossible grace through the vacuum of space, they attacked in perfect coordination, attempting to overwhelm the Grid's defenses through sheer numbers. But Sarah's modifications proved their worth. The independently operating cannons engaged multiple targets simultaneously, their rapid fire cutting through the swarm like a scythe through wheat. The adaptive shields absorbed incoming energy blasts while reconfiguring themselves to block the next wave of attacks. "This is incredible," Rodriguez breathed, watching the tactical display as Grid 7's kill count climbed rapidly. "We're actually holding them off." The battle raged for hours. Wave after wave of devourer forces crashed against the station's defenses, each assault more coordinated than the last. The main defensive grids began reporting heavy casualties as conventional tactics proved inadequate against the enemy's adaptive strategies. But Grid 7 held firm. Sarah's unconventional approach, combined with Rodriguez's technical expertise, created a defensive position that the devourers couldn't overcome through standard swarm tactics. They began to take notice, directing more and more forces toward the grid that was causing them such unexpected trouble. "Lieutenant," Rodriguez said during a brief lull in the fighting, "I'm reading massive energy signatures approaching our position. Something big is coming." Sarah studied the readings with growing alarm. Whatever was approaching was larger than anything they had faced so far, its energy output dwarfing even the station's main reactor. She had minutes, maybe less, before it arrived. The green stripe on her uniform seemed to mock her as she prepared for the greatest test of her military career. Everything she had learned, everything she had theorized, would be put to the ultimate test. Behind her, the evacuation continued as billions of civilians fled toward safety. Ahead of her, an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced, prepared to test whether human ingenuity could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah Chen, the officer labeled as green and untested, was about to discover what legends were made of. The massive devourer construct emerged from the chaos of battle like a living nightmare given form. Sarah had never seen anything like it in any tactical database or training simulation. The creature was easily the size of a small moon, its surface writhing with countless smaller organisms that moved across its hull like antibodies through a bloodstream. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed along its length, creating hypnotic displays that seemed designed to disorient prey. "Rodriguez, are you seeing this?" Sarah whispered, unable to hide the awe in her voice. The technician's face had gone pale as he stared at his instruments. "Energy readings are off the charts, Lieutenant. That thing is generating enough power to level a continent. And it's heading straight for us." Lugger 5. Through the communication channels, Sarah could hear the panic spreading throughout the station. Other defensive grids were reporting similar massive constructs approaching their positions. Commander Vextai's voice cut through the chaos, his usual calm demeanor strained to the breaking point. "All stations. We have confirmed multiple devourer planetary assault organisms approaching. These are beyond anything in our previous intelligence. All units are to concentrate maximum firepower on these targets immediately." Sarah watched her tactical display as the station's main cannons swiveled toward the approaching giants. The first salvo struck the nearest construct dead center. Plasma beams that could vaporize a battleship splashing harmlessly against its organic armor. The creature barely seemed to notice, continuing its inexorable approach toward the station. "Our main guns aren't even scratching it," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with fear. "How are we supposed to stop something like that?" Sarah found herself thinking of her academy training, specifically a lecture on asymmetric warfare given by Professor Mackenzie, a veteran of the hegemony's expansion wars. "Sometimes," he had said, "the biggest enemy presents the biggest opportunity. Large systems require large amounts of coordination. Disrupt the coordination, and size becomes a weakness rather than a strength." "Rodriguez, can you give me a detailed scan of that creature's energy patterns? I want to know how it's controlling all those smaller organisms." The technician's hands flew across his instruments. "Working on it now, ma'am. The energy signatures are incredibly complex. But there seems to be a central node near the front of the organism. It's putting out massive electromagnetic pulses at regular intervals. Command and control, Sarah murmured, pieces of a plan beginning to form in her mind. The smaller organisms need constant direction from the main consciousness. If we could disrupt that signal, the plasma cannons don't have enough power to penetrate that armor, Rodriguez pointed out. Even our modified configuration won't make a difference against something that size. Sarah studied the approaching creature more carefully, noting the way the smaller organisms moved across its surface. They weren't just randomly distributed. They followed specific patterns, clustering around certain areas while avoiding others. It reminded her of something she had seen in her xenobiology courses. Rodriguez, what if we're thinking about this wrong? What if that's not armor protecting the command node? What do you mean? Look at the distribution of the smaller organisms. They're avoiding certain areas of the hull, especially near those bioluminescent patches. In many biological systems, bioluminescence serves as a warning to other organisms about toxic or dangerous areas. Rodriguez caught on quickly. You're thinking those bright spots are some kind of natural weak points? Or artificial ones? The devourers aren't mindless beasts. They're incredibly intelligent, which means they probably build redundancies into their organisms. Those patches might be secondary command nodes, designed to take over if the primary one is damaged. The massive construct was close enough now that Sarah could make out individual details on its surface. The smaller organisms covering its hull varied in size from fighter craft to small corvettes, all of them biomechanical hybrids that defied conventional understanding of technology. They moved with purpose, some detaching from the main body to form screening forces, while others reconfigured themselves into what appeared to be weapon systems. Lieutenant, Rodriguez called out, I'm reading massive energy buildup in the creature's forward section. I think it's preparing to fire. The construct's front end began to glow with gathering power, bioluminescent patterns converging toward a central point, like water flowing into a drain. The energy readings climbed beyond anything Sarah had ever seen, suggesting a weapon capable of cracking a planet's crust. All weapons, target the secondary nodes, Sarah ordered, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't feel. Rapid fire. Concentrate on the bioluminescent patches. We need to disrupt its coordination before it can fire that weapon. Defense Grid 7's plasma cannons swiveled toward the massive target, their targeting computers struggling to lock onto the specific points Sarah had identified. The first volley struck the creature's hull, plasma bolts splashing against the organic armor with minimal effect. But Sarah noticed something encouraging. The smaller organisms near the impact points scattered in apparent confusion, their coordinated movements becoming erratic. We're having an effect, Rodriguez shouted. The organisms near those patches are responding to our fire. Maybe you're right about the secondary nodes. The massive construct's main weapon continued charging, its energy output climbing toward catastrophic levels. Sarah realized they had maybe 30 seconds before it fired. And whatever that weapon was, she doubted the station's shields could withstand it. All cannons, continuous fire on the secondary nodes, she commanded. Everything we have. Right now. The plasma cannons opened up in a devastating barrage, their beams converging on the bioluminescent patches scattered across the creature's hull. Each hit seemed to cause increasing confusion among the smaller organisms, their coordinated movements breaking down into chaotic, swirling patterns. Then something unexpected happened. One of the secondary nodes exploded in a brilliant flash of blue-white light, the blast tearing through the surrounding organic tissue like fire through paper. The smaller organisms in that area immediately went dormant, their movements ceasing entirely, as the command signal they depended on was severed. Did you see that? Rodriguez asked excitedly. The whole section just shut down when we hit that node. Sarah's mind raced with new possibilities. If destroying the secondary nodes caused local shutdowns, then the creature's supposedly impregnable size was actually a massive vulnerability. All weapons, concentrate fire on the remaining secondary nodes. Ignore everything else. The battle had drawn the attention of other defensive positions. Sarah could see plasma fire from other grids converging on the massive construct, but most of it was aimed at the main body where it had no effect. Only Grid 7 was targeting the specific weak points, systematically destroying the creature's distributed command system. Another secondary node exploded, then another. With each destruction, larger sections of the creature went dark and lifeless. The main weapon's energy buildup faltered as the primary consciousness lost control over increasing portions of its own body. "Lieutenant, you need to see this," Rodriguez called out, his voice filled with amazement. "The other Devourer forces are responding to what we're doing. They're breaking off their attacks and converging on our position." Sarah looked at her tactical display and felt her heart sink. Hundreds of smaller Devourer craft were abandoning their previous targets and heading straight for Defense Grid 7. They had recognized the threat her unconventional tactics represented and were moving to eliminate it before she could do more damage. "How long until they reach us?" she asked. 4 minutes, maybe 5 if we're lucky." Sarah looked at the massive construct, noting that roughly half of its secondary nodes had been destroyed. It was still operational, but clearly struggling to maintain coordination. The main weapon had stopped charging, though she couldn't tell if that was due to damage or just temporary disruption. "Rodriguez, can you patch me through to Commander Vextai?" "Working on it now." "Got him." "Commander, this is Lieutenant Chen at Grid 7. I need to transmit tactical data to all defensive positions immediately." Vextai's voice crackled through the communications system, nearly drowned out by battle noise in the background. "Chen, this isn't the time for theories. We're being overwhelmed across all fronts." "Sir, the large constructs have weak points. The bioluminescent patches on their hulls are secondary command nodes. If you destroy enough of them, you can cause cascading failures throughout their control systems." There was a moment of static-filled silence. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been doing it for the last 10 minutes. Grid 7 has effectively disabled one of the constructs by targeting these specific points." Another pause, then Vextai's voice returned with new urgency. "All stations, this is command. New tactical protocol. Ignore the main body of large Devourer constructs and concentrate all fire on bioluminescent patches." Grid 7 has demonstrated the effectiveness of this approach. Sarah watched her display as plasma fire from across the station began redirecting toward the weak points she had identified. The results were dramatic and immediate. One by one, the massive constructs began experiencing system failures as their distributed command networks collapsed under coordinated attack. But the Devourers were adapting too. The swarm heading toward Grid 7 had reorganized itself into a tight formation designed to overwhelm her defenses through concentrated attack. Sarah could see energy signatures suggesting they were carrying heavy weapons, probably salvaged from destroyed hegemony ships. "Incoming!" Rodriguez shouted. "Multiple contacts. High-energy weapons locked onto our position." The first wave struck Grid 7 like a hammer blow. Devourer energy weapons, crude but devastating, smashed into the grid's shields with overwhelming force. The adaptive barriers held for the first few seconds, but Sarah could see the power readings dropping rapidly as the shield generators struggled to cope with the sustained assault. "Shields at 60% and falling," Rodriguez reported. "At this rate, they'll fail in less than 2 minutes." Sarah's mind worked frantically, trying to find a solution. The standard defensive doctrine called for concentrating shield power to resist the attack. But that would leave the plasma cannons vulnerable to the smaller Devourer craft that were using the main assault as cover. Then she remembered something from her engineering courses, a theoretical application that had never been tested in actual combat conditions. "Rodriguez, can you reconfigure the shield generators to create a rotating barrier instead of a static one?" "A rotating barrier? I'm not sure I understand." "Instead of trying to absorb all the incoming fire, we create a shield that moves, deflecting attacks away from critical systems while maintaining coverage. It would reduce the overall protective strength, but it might let us survive long enough to keep fighting." Rodriguez's hands flew across the control interfaces. "I can try, but it's going to require manual coordination of all 6 generators. The timing has to be perfect, or we'll end up with gaps in coverage." "Do it." The shield configuration began changing, the static blue barrier around Grid 7 flickering and reforming into a complex pattern of overlapping energy fields. Instead of trying to stop the Devourer weapons, the shields began deflecting them, sending energy blasts careening off into space while maintaining protection for the plasma cannons. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The overwhelming assault that had been draining their power reserves was suddenly manageable, the deflected energy reducing the load on their generators while maintaining defensive coverage. But the rotating shields required constant manual adjustment, forcing Rodriguez to work at a pace that couldn't be sustained indefinitely. "This is working, but I can't keep it up forever," he warned, sweat beading on his forehead as he juggled multiple control interfaces simultaneously. Sarah took over targeting the plasma cannons, while Rodriguez managed the shields, her hands moving across the weapon controls with growing confidence. The independently operating guns engaged multiple targets simultaneously, their rapid fire cutting through the Devourer formation like a scythe through wheat. The enemy adapted again, spreading their formation to reduce the effectiveness of the grid's concentrated fire. But this played into Sarah's hands, as the dispersed formation was exactly what her modified targeting systems had been designed to handle. The plasma cannons tracked multiple targets across a wide area, their sustained fire gradually whittling down the attacking force. Minutes passed like hours as the battle raged around Grid 7. Sarah found herself falling into a rhythm, her academy training combining with desperate innovation to create tactics that no textbook had ever described. The Devourers kept adapting, but so did she, modifying shield configurations and weapon patterns in real time to counter their evolving strategies. "Lieutenant," Rodriguez called out, his voice strained with exhaustion. "I'm reading massive energy signatures approaching from multiple vectors. The Devourers are committing everything they have to taking out our position." Sarah looked at her tactical display and felt her heart sink. Hundreds of enemy craft were converging on Grid 7 from every direction, their combined firepower enough to overwhelm any defensive position. Behind them, she could see the partially disabled construct beginning to regenerate, its remaining secondary nodes working to restore function to the damaged sections. "Time until they reach us?" she asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. 3 minutes, maximum. "And Lieutenant, they're not just trying to destroy us anymore. Some of those craft are boarding ships. I think they want to capture our position intact, probably to study our tactics." The thought of devourer organisms analyzing her modifications, learning her innovations and turning them against other hegemony forces, filled Sarah with cold determination. Whatever happened next, she couldn't let them take Grid 7 alive. "Rodriguez, how much power do we have in reserve?" "About 15 minutes of sustained combat, maybe 20 if we're careful with the energy allocation." Sarah stared at the approaching enemy force, her mind working through possibilities and probabilities. The evacuation still needed more time. Probably another 12 hours minimum. The station's other defenses were holding, but only because they were now using her targeting data to attack the construct's weak points. An idea began forming. Dangerous and desperate, but possibly their only chance. The Devourers wanted to capture Grid 7 to learn from it. But what if she could use that desire against them? What if the lesson they learned was exactly the opposite of what they expected? "Rodriguez," she said quietly, "how would you feel about making history?" Rodriguez looked up from his control panel, exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. "What kind of history are we talking about, Lieutenant?" Sarah's fingers moved across her tactical display, highlighting the approaching Devourer forces and their probable boarding routes. "The kind where 2 untested soldiers with green stripes teach an ancient enemy that humans don't follow conventional rules." The plan she was formulating went against every principle of military strategy she had been taught. Standard doctrine called for fighting from prepared positions, using overlapping fields of fire and defensive barriers to wear down attacking forces. But the Devourers had adapted to standard doctrine, learning to counter conventional tactics through bitter experience. "They want to capture us alive to study our modifications," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as the plan crystallized in her mind. "But what if we let them? What if we turn Grid 7 into the galaxy's most expensive trap?" Rodriguez caught on quickly, his engineering background letting him see the possibilities she was suggesting. "You want to booby-trap our own position? That's actually brilliant, and completely insane. The best plans usually are. Can you rig the plasma cannon power cells to overload on command?" "Easily. But Lieutenant, if we detonate 12 plasma cannon power cells simultaneously, the explosion will be visible from 3 star systems away. Nothing within 100 kilometers is going to survive that. Sarah looked at the tactical display showing the massive Devourer construct struggling to repair itself. Its bulk dominated the space near forward base Kepler, close enough that the explosion Rodriguez described would certainly destroy it completely. More importantly, the shockwave would disrupt every Devourer force in the immediate area, buying precious time for the evacuation to continue. How long do you need to set up the overload sequence? 5 minutes. Maybe 4 if I skip the safety protocols. Skip them. And Rodriguez? Make sure the detonation signal requires both our authorization codes. I don't want either of us able to trigger this accidentally. Rodriguez. As Rodriguez worked frantically to prepare their ultimate weapon, Sarah focused on the approaching enemy forces. She had to make the trap convincing, which meant fighting just hard enough to seem legitimate without actually preventing the Devourers from boarding Grid 7. The first wave of attackers struck the grid's outer defenses with overwhelming force. Sarah adjusted her tactics, using the plasma cannons to target the smaller craft while deliberately leaving gaps in their defensive coverage. To an outside observer, it would look like the grid was being overwhelmed despite fierce resistance. Contact established. Rodriguez called out. Devourer boarding craft are attaching to access ports 7 and 12. I'm reading multiple organisms moving through the outer corridors. Sarah drew her plasma rifle, checking its charge levels one final time. How long until the overload sequence is ready? 2 more minutes. The power cells are building toward critical mass, but I need to synchronize the detonation timers across all 12 cannons. Through the bunker's internal monitors, Sarah could see the Devourer organisms making their way through Grid 7's corridors. They moved with disturbing grace, despite their biomechanical nature, their forms constantly shifting between technological and organic configurations. Some appeared to be pure information-gathering organisms, their sensor arrays sweeping every surface they encountered. Others were clearly warriors, armed with weapons that seemed to grow directly from their bodies. They advanced in perfect coordination, each organism covering others in a tactical formation that demonstrated sophisticated military thinking. They're learning, Sarah whispered, watching the creatures adapt their approach in real time as they encountered the grid's defensive measures. Look how they're modifying their formation every time they hit a security barrier. Which is why this has to work, Rodriguez replied grimly. If they get hold of our tactical modifications and survive to share them with the rest of their forces, every defensive position in the galaxy becomes vulnerable. The Devourer organisms reached the outer sections of the command bunker, their movements becoming more cautious as they detected the higher energy readings from the plasma cannon control systems. Sarah could hear strange sounds echoing through the ventilation ducts, a mixture of mechanical whirring and organic chittering that made her skin crawl. Sequence is ready, Rodriguez announced. All plasma cannon power cells are approaching critical mass. When we trigger the overload, we'll have approximately 30 seconds before detonation. Understood. And Rodriguez, it's been an honor serving with you. The young technician grinned, despite the circumstances. Likewise, ma'am. Think they'll remember us? I think they'll remember what we stood for. The first Devourer organism appeared at the bunker's main entrance, its form shifting and adapting as it analyzed the room's layout. Sarah was struck by how alien its intelligence felt, watching patterns of thought that followed completely different logic than any sentient species she had encountered. More organisms poured into the bunker, their sensor arrays scanning every control interface and data display. Sarah and Rodriguez raised their weapons but didn't fire, maintaining the illusion that they were overwhelmed defenders making a last stand. The creatures moved closer, their attention focused on the modified control systems that had made Grid 7 so effective. Sarah could see understanding dawning in their alien consciousness as they began to comprehend the tactical innovations that had caused them so much trouble. Now they know, she whispered to Rodriguez. They understand what made us so effective. And that knowledge is going to die with them. One of the larger organisms approached Sarah directly, its biomechanical form towering over her as complex sensor arrays emerged from its torso. She could feel it scanning her, probing for information about her thought processes and tactical reasoning. Do it, Sarah said quietly, her hand moving to her authorization panel. Lieutenant, Rodriguez replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances. It's been a privilege. Together, they entered their authorization codes, triggering the catastrophic overload sequence that Rodriguez had prepared. Throughout Grid 7, plasma cannon power cells began building toward critical mass, their safety systems disabled, and their containment fields deliberately destabilized. The devourer organisms detected the energy buildup immediately, their forms shifting with what Sarah interpreted as alarm, but they were too late to escape the trap she had prepared. The explosion began at the grid's outer cannons, a chain reaction of plasma containment failures that propagated through the entire defensive network in seconds. The blast was everything Rodriguez had predicted and more. A brilliant sphere of superheated plasma that expanded outward at significant fraction of light speed. Sarah's last conscious thought was of Marcus and the billions of civilians whose evacuation ships were now far enough away to escape the destruction. The green stripe on her uniform had marked her as untested, but her actions in these final moments would be studied and remembered long after the devourer threat was finally defeated. The explosion vaporized Grid 7 completely, taking with it every devourer organism that had boarded the facility. The shockwave struck the massive construct that had been slowly regenerating, tearing through its organic hull and disrupting the remaining secondary command nodes in a cascade of system failures. But the true impact of Sarah's sacrifice became apparent in the hours that followed. The complete destruction of one of their information-gathering expeditions sent shockwaves through the devourer collective consciousness. They had never encountered a species willing to destroy valuable tactical positions rather than allow them to be captured. Commander Vex Tai, coordinating the station's defenses from the primary command center, watched in amazement as devourer forces across the entire sector began exhibiting unprecedented caution. Their previous aggressive swarm tactics gave way to careful probing attacks, their confidence shaken by the realization that humans were capable of tactical thinking they couldn't predict or counter. Communications. Get me a channel to all defensive positions, Vex Tai ordered, his forearms moving across control interfaces with renewed purpose. All stations are to implement the Chen protocols immediately. The Chen protocols, hastily developed based on Sarah's tactical innovations, spread throughout the hegemony's defensive networks with remarkable speed. Her insights about targeting secondary command nodes, combined with her adaptive shield configurations and independent targeting systems, proved devastatingly effective against devourer forces. More importantly, her willingness to sacrifice a valuable position rather than let it be captured alive became a cornerstone of hegemony military doctrine. The devourers, accustomed to learning from captured technology and prisoners, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that would destroy itself rather than provide intelligence to their opponents. The battle for Forward Base Kepler continued for another 18 hours, but the tide had turned decisively in the hegemony's favor. Using Sarah's tactical innovations, the station's defenders managed to destroy or disable every massive construct in the attacking force, while inflicting casualties that forced the surviving devourers to retreat toward the galactic rim. In the weeks that followed, as news of the victory spread throughout hegemony space, Sarah Chen became a legend. Military academies added her tactical innovations to their core curriculum, while her final sacrifice became a symbol of human determination that inspired resistance movements on a dozen worlds. Technician Rodriguez, who had volunteered to die alongside her, was posthumously promoted to Chief Engineering Officer and awarded the hegemony's highest honor for valor. His technical expertise in implementing Sarah's unconventional ideas proved as crucial as her tactical genius in turning the tide of battle. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. Marcus Chen, Sarah's younger brother, used his engineering skills to help design the next generation of hegemony defense systems. Working with the tactical principles his sister had died to prove, he created automated defensive networks that could adapt and evolve without requiring human operators to sacrifice themselves. The new systems were designated as Chen-class defensive grids, ensuring that Sarah's name would be spoken with respect and gratitude for generations to come. More importantly, they embodied the essential lesson she had taught the galaxy, that human ingenuity, when combined with courage and sacrifice, could overcome any obstacle. Years later, as the devourer threat finally receded and peace returned to the galaxy, historians would mark the Battle of Forward Base Kepler as the turning point in the war. They would write of brilliant tactical innovations and heroic sacrifices, of a species that refused to surrender even when facing impossible odds. But those who had served with Sarah Chen knew a simpler truth. She had worn the green stripe of an untested officer, marked as inexperienced and assigned to the least important position on the station. Yet when the moment came to prove herself, she had demonstrated the essential quality that made humanity special: the willingness to think beyond conventional limits and act on principles that transcended personal survival. The green stripe she had once worn in shame became a symbol of honor throughout the hegemony's military forces. New recruits wore it with pride, knowing that it marked them as part of the tradition Sarah Chen had established. Experience would come with time, but courage and innovation were qualities that couldn't be taught through conventional training. In the end, Sarah's greatest victory wasn't the tactical innovations that saved forward-base Kepler, or the sacrifice that destroyed the Devourer expedition. It was the proof she had provided that true military leadership came not from years of experience or battlefield glory, but from the willingness to see beyond established doctrine and fight for something greater than oneself. The galaxy was a safer place because a young officer with a green stripe had refused to accept that inexperience meant ineffectiveness. Her actions had become the stuff of legend, but the principles she had demonstrated remained as relevant as ever. That courage, innovation, and sacrifice were the true foundations of victory. Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been labeled as green by those who measured worth through conventional standards, but her actions on the battlefield had proven that the color of heroism wasn't gold or blue, but the green of new growth, fresh thinking, and the unwavering determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Devourers had learned a harsh lesson about underestimating human potential. So had the hegemony's own military leadership. In the end, both sides discovered that true strength came not from following established patterns, but from the courage to write new ones when the old approaches were no longer sufficient. Sarah Chen's legacy lived on in every defensive grid that bore her name, every tactical manual that quoted her innovations, and every young officer who wore the green stripe with pride instead of shame. She had transformed a symbol of inexperience into a badge of honor, proving that the galaxy's greatest heroes often came from the most unexpected places. The stars themselves seemed brighter in the sectors she had helped defend, their light carrying the promise that courage and innovation would always triumph over conventional thinking and overwhelming odds. Sarah Chen had been labeled as untested, but her actions had become the gold standard for military excellence throughout the known galaxy. Her story became required reading at every military academy, not just for its tactical lessons but for its demonstration of what humans could accomplish when they refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. The green stripe evolved from a mark of inexperience to a symbol of unlimited potential, worn proudly by officers who understood that true heroism came from within. In the quiet moments between battles, veterans would sometimes speak of the young lieutenant who had changed everything with 12 plasma cannons and a willingness to think beyond established doctrine. They would remember that courage wasn't measured by the color of one's uniform stripe, but by the depth of one's commitment to protecting others. Sarah Chen had been labeled green, but her actions had become battlefield legend, and in the end, that was the only color that truly mattered.